All right. Hello and welcome to Digital Ragnarok, Digital Awareness Podcast. In today's episode, we're joined by Chloe Diamond, CMO of Swash and art aficionado. Chloe, how do you go from art into something like a data union, Swash namely?
Firstly, thank you for having me here. I'm very excited to talk, and thanks for the opportunity. For me, like you mentioned, my background is more with arts, but I've been actually working alongside my studies, working with blockchain and technology in general for the last 3 years. So I guess you could say that was the sort of main lead in to how I've ended up at Swash. But then I'm also with that technology experience, I'm kind of became quite acutely aware of what was missing as well. I'm not a techie, I can't code, but I think there's something in like the lack of voices you hear from different perspectives in that space. So I was almost kind of for a few years telling myself that, oh, you do art history, so you can't really have an opinion on that particular subject. But actually, I think in the blockchain space as a whole, I think there is like a very the sort of attitudes are changing to be more pro having different opinions together. I was studying history of art and working in blockchain with a company based in the US, sort of simultaneously. So the interest from blockchain actually came from about 2014, because I used to live in Georgia, and I'm not sure if you know, but Georgia, at least at the time, was mining a lot of Bitcoin. Now I'm not sure where it is in the rankings. And I just kept hearing about it, and I ended up sort of reading some books on it and was like, okay, this is very cool. This is interesting, but didn't really think there was, anything I could really do there. So I was just enjoying from a distance for a long time. And then, the 2017 ICO boom happened, and I think that kind of catapulted a lot of people forward in many ways. Obviously, different projects happening, and for me, it was interesting just to see the potential of the technology. Like that was kind of really underlined for me at that point. And then, I think since then, like the thing that had been missing is really getting that real practical use case of blockchain and tech in general to kind of the real world's environment. I like to think I'm quite tech savvy. And then I heard about Swash. I think there was a job listing posted through Outlier Ventures, which Swash has been on the cohort for the last few months. And I applied because I thought, oh, it sounds really cool. I'm interested in data. I'm interested in technology. It sounds really fun. I applied, started working with the team in July. And since then, there's just been so many repeated wake-up calls about like what's going on with the data economy, what's happening in terms of different answers to it, whether that's coming from, we always hear about privacy, or we hear about, even for example, in Europe, GDPR, but we don't necessarily think about it, I think, in the way that affects us as individuals. So, that's what really got me interested with Swash too, because we're the first real life use case of a data union. I guess the name is sort of self-explanatory, but the idea of people coming together as a collective. And for me, I think with the way the internet is, that's all kind of almost like the pinnacle of the internet where we are now, because there's this sort of movement towards that people realize we're kind of, I don't know, maybe millennial trauma or something, but we can't do things only as individual monopolies or centralized powers now. It doesn't necessarily benefit everyone involved. So I think with Swash, that was one of the main things for me, is that it's really sort of focused on this sort of collective power, if you like. That's sort of a bit of a rambling overview, but I know there's a lot of points to explore, and it keeps changing as well.
It feels maybe that the technology wasn't ready for a decentralized environment. So it's not so strange that we get these centralized powers like Facebook or Twitter or Google and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But now with blockchain, the implications are how should I put it? it feels like the horizon all of a sudden it's a bit more optimistic. It's a bit more clear now.
Yeah, I guess you could say that's really that difference between Web 2 and then Web 3. And I also think in the blockchain space, a lot of people are almost nostalgic for Web 1, like that sort of very experimental, no rules. Everyone can just play around, see what they can come up with and what happens from that point. And then, I mean, of course, the turning point being, I guess, 2008, 2007 with Facebook and other, maybe even earlier if you consider Amazon too.
I think Facebook was 2006.
Oh, really? Well, I know they got momentum more from, say,
yeah,
like definitely late tens. Wait, or early 2000s. I know for me, like I was born in 94, so it was kind of just I mean, the internet and the computers were always around, but I saw that people really took it as like a daily thing, even at the young age of, say, 13 or something. It became such a daily part of life almost overnight. And I'm sure many of us had the same, whether it's like in work environments, suddenly everything got shifted. And I think that sort of happened again this year as well. And I guess the technology is well, I mean, it's been made to adapt much quicker because of everything going online now during the pandemic, which I would imagine can help people become more aware of their online lives and more aware of what happens to data because, for example, their kids are using Zoom every day and they maybe are becoming a little bit more woken up to it. And then, yeah, I hope with that's something again that aligns with that sort of ideology around blockchain as a whole. So I'm pretty optimistic about whatever is to come with Web3 because I think everyone's sort of on the same page in that respect.
But it's a very broad page. I mean, there's a lot of space on that page.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a lot of directions that are still unknown. I feel like there's literally it feels like there are endless possibilities, but at the same time, when you see all the new things that come up every day, it also feels in a way maybe okay, it's not Web 1, but it's pretty wild.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even before the podcast started, we were talking about how there's just so much to keep up with, or so many exciting uses of something we think, okay, maybe it's already brand new, but it's something we think we sort of understand, and then someone else has already created this whole other bubble onto it, which is then, I don't know, however many other offshoots will come from that particular bubble.
It's very modular, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, but I mean, that being said, I agree that there's a big, broad page to be covered and so much that we still haven't even began thinking of. But at the same time, I think if the sort of, I don't want to say ideology necessarily, but if everyone sort of has the same underlying priorities, whether that's about bringing more back to users or being more transparent as well, like all of these things are kind of, I mean, we all saw kind of what's gone wrong with Web 2, if you like, whether that's like Amazon, Facebook, Google. It's pretty obvious, I think, even to the general public at this point, because hearing about Cambridge Analytica scandals and other kind of also legislation too. I think the conscious effort in Web3 to not repeat those problems, I think that's sort of the underbelly at this point. And I'm hoping, and I mean, everyone I know in the space is really actively trying to sort of not only not do the same, but actually do the opposite, which is really exciting.
I was going to ask you because since we're talking about data, and at the moment you don't really get that much of a say in how your data is being collected and how it is used, and that's literally where you're coming from with Swash. You're giving the user an option, a chance for the first time to actually make money on your data. Sure, you can make some money through Brave with their BAT, but I think because I have all my what do you call those? All those ad blockers enabled. I don't make any money on Brave.
Oh, really?
yeah, it's very little money that comes in. But it feels like with Swash, you have the option to literally see your data and sell it, and you get a cut of the percentage. I mean, you basically dictate how your data is being used.
Yeah, I mean, that being said, like like Swash doesn't necessarily solve every problem around data because it's just almost too huge for one company to cover. But it's interesting you mentioned Brave because I mean we're compatible with Brave too, so people can earn data coin through Swash and then BATS token through Brave. But I think the thing too, because they're the browser with the browser plugins, it sort of all works as like an interoperable feature. But that being said, they kind of monetize attention for adverts, which is what you just mentioned now as well, which I guess, I mean, that's a hugely useful case and obviously much more advanced than what we get with anything like Google. I'm sort of hating on Google a bit, but obviously every other company out there as well. But then with Swash, we're actually monetizing that data. So it's not something that is necessarily restricted only to advertisers. But actually that data would be useful for, I don't know, for example, AI and machine learning training, different types of brands, advertisers, and people that want this kind of insight over audiences, market intelligence, like this kind of thing. There's a lot, even hedge funds, there's like so many different use cases that actually means that people are more likely to get more value back because it's sort of spread more widely, if you like. But then at the same time, that data is being taken anyway. So what Swash does is basically capture it and make sure that you have your cut, which is 70% of profits sold from the data. But yeah, I mean, in that sense, I think the more people that will come into that, because once it's captured, it's pooled together, and that pool is also the data union. And like any other kind of union model, the more people involved, not only is it more valuable for data buyers to have access to more data, because it's more diverse, it creates less bias, there's all these other reasons, but it also means that the people involved will start to get more power and more say, if you like, whether that's social or I guess like political capital too, but also eventually legislative authority, because I know like existing union models that we might be familiar with. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of, that technology wasn't really around because I know like we're using Streamr's technology, and before this point, people have definitely tried to sell their data as an individual before. But two problems. The first one being that individual data actually isn't that interesting for data buyers. Probably won't get anything for it because the whole reason the data union becomes more valuable is because there's more people. As an individual, it's not like if people want to sell something to you, for example, then one person isn't going to spend as much on Amazon as 10 million people, obviously. So, and then the other reason being that individual, like there's a particular story actually from 2000, I think it's 2002 or the year 2000, one or the other. This guy decided to collect all of his data from however, I don't know, 800 websites or however many there were on the internet at that time. He collected, downloaded his data, and then tried to sell that, I think, through eBay, just on a USB stick, which is sort of sounds absurd. But then thinking about it, if we're not using the technology that we're using today, you wouldn't really have many other options even now if you wanted to sort of go out there and sell your data as an individual. So yeah, Swash like really is just that kind of a different way of collecting the data and capturing it, and then using Streamr's technology as the kind of connecting points then between the individual and the data buyer. So it's sorry,
Sorry, no, I just wanted to add that Streamr is the network that made it possible for an app like Swash to even exist by building the infrastructure that takes care of all the payments and the marketplace that distributes the data that you collect through Swash.
Yeah, exactly. And they also have this unique sort of one-to-many payment that happens. So when a data buyer buys access to the data, it automatically goes through a smart contract. So it's like a self-executing contract that when that one payment turns into an automatic distributed payment for everyone in that data union. So it's not like you have to wait for a bank to go and approve the transaction, and 2 weeks later you might receive, but actually I don't think banks would even let you if you wanted to receive 0.01
I
pence
don't think
from.
it makes financial sense for them to transfer that with money.
Exactly. So this is another reason why blockchain is so useful in this case as well.
So if you would be to simplify the whole idea, you could say that you're using your computer as normal. You went to swashapp.io and you downloaded the plugin for Firefox and is it Brave as well and Chrome?
Yeah, and also Microsoft Edge and I think Yandex and Kiwi too. And then other ones coming soon as well.
Oh,
All major
anything you want to announce here?
Not just yet, but
Okay.
yeah, stay tuned.
Fair enough. All right, so you get the plugin, and literally it's business as usual. You get this automatic wallet where all your all the earnings from your data you just get sent there.
Mm-hmm.
And because the whole app is on top of the Streamr network that processes all these payments instantly as they happen, as the data gets bought,
Mm-hmm.
the payment gets automatically executed through a smart contract, and then literally you got the money in your account. So there's no intermediaries, no middleman.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, in that ecosystem, Swash and Streamr are just sort of the tools to make it happen. So it's only really between the user and the data buyer. And that being said as well, the data is end-to-end encrypted and anonymized, even though we're not taking any sensitive data anyway, but it's also anonymized then in that sort of in-between process. So yeah, I mean, that happens automatically, but also, so when you're actually in Swash, when you go to set up, like you mentioned, you can either create a new wallet or connect to an existing one. And then when you're actually looking at the browser plugin, I mean, normally it's just as a small logo in the corner, which you can click on and say you have however much data. But then if you open the whole screen, then you get more information about, for example, how many referrals you've made, and then what bonus you've got from those referrals. You have the option, of course, to withdraw your earnings as well. And there's like a few other features there which we keep adding to and also updating user experience to make that kind of more friendly as well. But yeah, that being said, we're deliberately trying to be as unobtrusive as possible because we don't necessarily need anyone to start changing their behavior when they're just going around using the internet as normal. So, I mean, we have the main domains covered now. So across different genres, like different categories like news, search, media, social media as well, fashion, like these kind of things, and then the main domains within those categories. So this is something which, as we grow, we'll kind of bring in more categories too, which means people can sort of earn more from different sites. And then the data that's actually captured on those sites is unique to that website. Like, for example, Amazon being an easy example of online shopping, that it would be, for example, what you are searching for, the results that come up, whether you've added that to your shopping basket or to your wish list. And then if, for example, if you made that payment, like, we don't see anything of any of your financial details, but it will just say if you actually bought the product, or maybe you dropped out and decided to go and buy it on eBay instead. Because we're a browser plugin, we can actually see what happened in that particular instance. So yeah, there's sort of those sort of unique insights as well.
And I just got lost in your in your answer there. So how I mean, I get the fact that there was this incentive to build an app like Swash because of the Streamr network, and obviously you saw the network and you were like, well, we got to do this. But I'm asking, is there also some sort of philosophical aspect to this endeavor, or is it all just based on this facilitation of an end-to-end transaction?
Yes, I mean, like Swash did begin as a technical experiment. Like our CTO just he really liked what Streamr did and was like, okay, I can do something here. And his sort of priority again was to sort of make it as friendly and I guess as pro mass adoption as possible. Because I mean, with a browser plugin, you don't really need to do anything after just initially installing it. It's all just the rest is happening for you. Sometimes nice to go in and see how much you've earned, but I mean, you don't have to, you're not obliged to do anything. But then, yeah, of course, with that, first there's the excitement around using a new technology, which I guess you could sort of say is a kind of concept that spans a lot of different projects now. But then this idea of the data union as a whole. I mean, our CTO as well, his background is with like cybersecurity, and he has a very good understanding of, I mean, he's like 10 years or more working in this industry. So he has this really unique and very specific understanding of data. And sort of, I guess, with that, understands the potential positive or negative uses of data as well. So I think for him, it was really important that, firstly, that more people are aware of this, which we were also discussing, that it's something which, although affecting almost everything we do, whether it's elections, I think now the US has their election today of time of recording.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I don't even want to think about it. But also health data being another thing. Like all of this is affecting our daily lives, but it's sort of something that only a very select few not only know about, but also sort of are manipulating. So I think for him, it was really that side of the more people you bring into it and the more people kind of gather agency over their own digital identity, the more likely you are to kind of get away from that existing model and actually create something that's beneficial to everyone involved. Because I guess the other argument too is like, it's really easy to demonize data buyers in this situation because we're saying, oh, they're, I don't know, using third-party cookies to scrape personal information, and that definitely happens, and that's definitely not sustainable for anyone. It also means that the data buyers they're buying bad quality data because of that, because it's all collected in a really shady way and it's unreliable and all of these other reasons. So for
blood diamonds.
Yeah, if you like. I mean, in a sense, because we can't really just pretend, oh, we're just going to not use the internet and go off the grid and not need to rely on this and just be away from creating any data at all, because that's just not going to happen.
It's not
Too
really
much
feasible.
Exactly. And also, I mean, many of us are working online now, so even that alone. But there is this way that we can kind of be within the system, still benefit from how data brings us, I don't know, different convenience. We can, I don't know, for example, get Spotify playlists recommended to us, which is always nice. Online shopping is easy. Whatever other kind of benefits we have, I think there's just hundreds of things I could list now. We shouldn't necessarily have to lose out on the benefits of this technology as a whole and data and, I don't know, stopping the spread of a virus, even if as fundamental as this discussion is as well. But also with that, we shouldn't be exploited at the same time. So
I feel like the best way of getting people to care more about data is to just give them an incentive to do so. And what better way than to make them money?
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, before you'd get these questionnaires in the mail.
Mm-hmm.
Like they would ask you, oh, can you fill in this questionnaire and we'll give you these vouchers and you get a discount or something. But now you get actual money and you don't have to fill in anything. It just does it by itself.
Yeah, and I think that kind of underpins this main sort of ethos behind not only what Swash is doing, but other kind of initiatives around, where the idea of data being a form of labor, like we are using the internet and it's kind of work, or even if it's walking down the streets and CCTV is capturing where you walk, like I know it's scary, but that's the reality, that's actually a kind of an effort that's gone into something, whether it feels like it for us or not, which is actually very beneficial and very valuable to a lot of people. So I think with that, there's just a sense of, I mean, I think this is something Jaron Lanier is talking about as well, is that when you give people, he had a really good article recently, I think it was on Wired, where he's talking about AI as well, specifically with data. And this idea that when you actually give people a way to earn from this value, I mean, putting aside the huge wealth disparity the world is dealing with, people who have lost their jobs and things even in the last year, like putting all of that aside, just by giving people a way to earn from their value, they can also, firstly, they could spend that earning in a positive way. Like one thing with Swash, we're going to be integrating automatic donations to charities, so people can just, they don't necessarily need to know or to do anything, it's just happening in the background. And also they will have kind of, when you have, I mean, maybe it's a little bit, sounds a bit dystopian, but when you have money, you have power. So there'll be more people within the society who actually have some power on this kind of sort of structural level, away from just using the internet, if you like. So there's like several different branches here, but I think the reality being that no one wants to be exploited or feel like their data is being mined, to the point where, like, we had research that was conducted earlier in the year where people actually, when they learned that something like Swash exists, they're very happy and eager to learn more about it. But there's just the reality that people are apathetic until, like, if you say, okay, do you want to know what's going on with your data now? People just don't want to know because they already know that it's bad. So actually being able to offer a solution has been a really nice, it feels amazing to sort of be a part of that movement of people from all different areas, whether that's someone in the EU and coming from legislation and policy, something from, artists as well are really clued into these kind of just looking at things in different ways. And it feels like that's what we're doing with Swash. So I'm really excited.
And I mean, we shouldn't just stop at the idea of selling your data, because the underlying technologies there have so many use cases, and maybe you start with Swash and you get a taste for it and you realize, okay, so I can make money using my data, but what else can we do with this technology? I remember the example of Taiwan and how they used I don't know if it was blockchain, but I think it was some sort of open system, so that they could in real time, every 30 seconds, they would re-update all the stocks for surgical masks that they had all over the country. So you always knew the closest store that was to you where you could get a mask. And I think through that sort of a openness, that is a very similar technology to what you're using here with Streamr and Swash. They had, I think it was like 100 cases and 7 deaths or something like that. And there are 22 million people.
It's incredible. Yeah, I mean, that potential of the technology, and even just, it sounds like almost a simple thing, actually, what you just described, but to actually apply it in a way that is practical immediately, like today.
And this is possible because it's decentralized. I mean, nobody has to gather this. Everything happens, in the cloud in a way, and it's all open, so you can check everything. It has a state of being. It never changes. It remains that way.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's actually a really important point, because that's the other thing with data that I guess people don't necessarily trust, because we've only ever heard bad things about how it's being used. And another benefit of blockchain is that you don't need to believe anyone. You can go in, check the transactions, check the activity, and everything's open, everything's transparent. I mean, you can look at the code behind Swash to know how it works. All of these details, which it almost sounds like it should always be like that, but the reality is everything's sort of kept very secret, and that's also where that kind of power dynamic is out of balance.
Yeah, and it feels like, back in the day, English was lingua franca, and before that you maybe had French, and maybe before that you had Latin, and so on. And now it feels like coding is starting to become that. Because it feels like if you don't learn how to code, you're literally going to be shut out of this entire economy that is slowly but surely just taking over. And it feels like, back in the 60s, your chances of getting a job would be so much better if you knew English. And it feels a bit in the same way with coding today.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in an English-speaking country, so I can't
doesn't apply.
say about that. But no, I see what you mean. That's really interesting. I guess like obviously within coding, there's however many other different languages, even different coding languages. But I mean, we're both talking as non-technical people, if you like, although I do think there is room always for people who are technically oriented, but not necessarily able to code. And I mean, Web 2 has really shown us that it's quite dangerous to only have, for example, people who can code sort of creating this huge thing that's affected so much without necessarily having those other perspectives involved. I mean, I was discussing this a bit earlier too, but this, I mean, one thing that tends to happen is it can be a bit gatekeepery, that it's like, well, you're not part of the club because you don't have this particular skill. But it's like, actually, you have so many other skills to bring into the discussion. And I think that's really important. And I guess that being said, like as things are evolving, more and more people are conscious of that. They're agreeing with this as well. And I think generally it gets boring if you only hear about one type of thing. Like you can talk about Facebook and talk about the code or talk about algorithms, but actually what can we do after that point? And that's where the fun part begins, I think. But I mean, even for you as well, it's interesting that you've always had this interest in technology, but then sort of had a different career sort of direction, I guess. And then seeing where that overlap has been. Because I mean, like for me personally, I studied graphic design, I don't know, 10 years ago now. And it's still using the computer. You still need to know how these tools work. But I think it really drove home, for me anyway, that it is a tool and you're using it like a paintbrush. It's not necessarily the thing which tells you what to do. I think sometimes that gets lost in the kind of ongoing discourse about technology as a whole.
Yeah, no, I feel like you're getting close to something, and it feels like when I talk about coding, I'm also talking about how all these different languages, they're being simplified. So what used to be 10 lines of code, now it's only 2 lines of code, and it doesn't have the same complexity as it had to begin with. And now they're making these tools that you speak of. They're becoming, exactly the same way Photoshop was very difficult to begin with, and then became more and more complex, but at the same time more intuitive. And I feel that language has the ability to develop in the same way. And I believe that maybe we'll come to a point where coding won't be so restricted by all these different languages. You could just write something and it will know what you're trying to do. If it's a website, or if it's an app, or if it's a graphical interface.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's already some work being done in that direction with web design.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I guess there's sort of two ways of looking at it. I mean, if I want to be a bit pessimistic, I would say that could remind me of doublespeak in George Orwell's 1984, of this idea that by kind of simplifying the way we're communicating something, whether that's coding or, well, talking to a computer is what we're doing with coding, or in just day-to-day life, maybe it's limiting the potential of what could be built just because it's sort of within that very limited framework. But on the other hand, by simplifying or making things more accessible, I guess you kind of can create that thirst and that hook for people earlier on, then if they want to kind of dive in and keep going. Because I mean, I'm sure all of us have sort of looked at trying to code or something once or twice, and then it's just been so much, like for me, a very foreign language and a lot of information, very daunting, and it just puts you off because we're humans and who has time?
It's like French grammar.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's at least you can watch a film or something with learning a actual language, but yeah, coding is not quite so as friendly. But I mean, also with that, I guess like that's another thing with Swash. What we're keen to do is to have something that you can be a part of this ecosystem, or you can benefit from it without necessarily having to know that technical side. Because I think, at least in blockchain, something that's sort of held the whole space back, I think, is that you do need to have quite a deep level of understanding, okay, what's a wallet? What's an exchange? How do I actually get cryptocurrency? Even you don't it's not clear. And I mean, I've been dabbling around this space for quite a while, and even then I'm a bit like, oh, did I just do that properly? Did I click on something? I don't know, I accidentally sent this to the wrong address, and obviously there's no sort of centralized person to help you, so you're a bit on your own in the Wild West sometimes. Well, it feels like that anyway. And I guess technology as a whole, if I'm looking at like startup culture away from blockchain, I think we've really focused on making it open to as many people as possible, because obviously the more user friendly it is, the more people you're going to actually have using what you've created. So that was a big priority for us at Swash as well, just to make sure that people, like I said, you can have the wallet, or you can kind of use our solution without actually having to change anything. You don't need to, I don't know, remember to go in and press any button for it to work for you. And to be honest, I mean, maybe I'm biased, but I think that's one of the best ways to really bring people in to learn about all these other areas that are connected. It just makes it more exciting and more of that kind of stepping stone into something bigger.
It's a gateway drug.
Yes, yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. I'm sort of thinking about the Jaron Lanier and Glenn Wild. They were talking about MiDs. There's a really good YouTube video, I think, by New York Times Opinion, where they're sort of going.
The whole series.
Yeah, it's a really good series. I think, just for explaining how it's all working and why it's important. And Jaron is really nice to listen to as well. But yeah, this kind of idea that there's a lot of different types of data that are being collected, and data unions aren't necessarily fixing every problem in every area as well. So I think the data union makes the payment possible, but it doesn't necessarily sort of fix everything for you along the way, if that makes sense.
No, I mean, it makes sense that it's, how should I put it? It's more in the here and now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess. And I guess also the other thing would be that the data buyers, I mean, at least in Europe, they should be GDPR compliant as well. So I guess after that point, there is still the obligation on their part that they should sort of be working in the interest of the people who have provided that data. I'm not an expert on GDPR, this, I'm not going to go in. Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's changing as well. There's an update, I think.
Also, just want to mention real quick that I'll put a link to the series, the New York Times series with Jaron Lanier, for people that are interested in giving that a go, because he really does manage to explain a lot in, I don't know, there's like 5 episodes, 3 minutes each, and they're just perfect.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that's one of the best in terms of like overall understanding of what's going on, and then just the way he's framing it, I think is really innovative for people to actually say like, oh, hang on a second, yeah, like, because one thing I like with him is that, I mean, we always hear the discussion around, oh, the AI and the robots are going to take your jobs, and we're not worth anything in this new type of world that we live in. And he explained it in such a nice way that actually we are the ones sort of training this AI. We're useful, even more useful than we were before, if you like, because that wouldn't exist if it wasn't for us creating the information that fuels it. And I mean, there's like a whole other discussion here on AI bias and how we need to make sure that, I mean, this is another thing, that if you don't have access to data, enough data, or you don't have access to good quality data, then you're stifling innovation, in the sense that it's more likely that an AI is going to be trained badly and then show racist behavior, although that's kind of coming from particular bias in our own nature. So that's quite a philosophical conversation.
It becomes a bit of a mirror, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly. And I mean, there's the other side too, that I think maybe it's overlooked quite a lot, but like the value of data as its own concept is quite, I mean, that's just a whole episode on its own. There's so much to talk about, just how value is actually created, or who decides what that price should be.
You know, thinking of how all these possibilities that are starting to show their faces in regards to how we use data. I mean, there's a lot of options here. There's a lot of possibilities for new jobs that we don't know about yet. I mean, you could get this virtuoso that is really good at identifying trends. Sure, you have stuff like machine learning that will get a lot of stuff done, but that has to be trained. There's still space for the human factor. I mean, there's this saying that talent hits a target that nobody else can hit. Genius hits a target that nobody else can see. And with the abundance of data that's going to be available, surely there'll be those of us who become so so good at it that they can see the trends going in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess those people now would be like data scientists whose job is kind of to collect that raw data and then almost translate that into a way that is useful for whatever business, or I don't know, maybe they put it into different visuals that it's kind of understood by wider populations as well. So I think that side of thing will continue growing. It's already grown a lot. But then on the other side, with the data collected now, there's a big problem with it being quite bad quality just because of the collection methods. So I think it's something like 65% of time spent from data scientists is actually cleaning up existing data sets, which is time that their expertise could definitely be put elsewhere. So even just by having access to good quality data or even just more data, that sort of makes that job much smoother as well. And I guess with that, there's the type of people who maybe enter that space. I don't know, you can come at that from whichever other angle too. That sort of opens up the potential of that data to more people because it's sort of being translated in different ways. But yeah, I mean, either way, the insights that we get at the moment, I listed a few examples earlier of how, I don't know, custom insights are useful for whatever advertisers, for example, whatever other type of historical data might be useful for training AI and machine learning. But then it's also important to remember that those insights are beneficial for us in whatever other way, even as users. But at the same time, the problem comes up when those insights start getting manipulated. So we need to sort of have that authority again. And again, coming back to the idea of the union as a model.
But I mean, that manipulation happens today because of the fact that this data that's collected is being centralized. Isn't the whole idea of blockchain that you have this transparency, so that in order to avoid this sort of manipulation, I mean, theoretically, it shouldn't be possible to manipulate the data anymore, should it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I guess that comes back to the quote you had now, that maybe there's always going to be people that, I don't know, they have whatever data and they might spot something that other people don't know. Hopefully those people will have good intentions, but they might go, oh, you know what, I've noticed that this particular group of people tend to respond well. Actually, there's something Jaron Lanier mentions too, that we always seem to respond more intensively to negative words or negative news. And people at the moment I mean large sites that we're all familiar with, have kind of taken and created, algorithms basically are favoring that kind of news, fake news, and other discussions around that. But then, I mean, blockchain being transparent is one thing, but I guess you sort of would need to understand where how to decipher that information at this stage is still quite there's still kind of a learning curve behind that. But then, I mean, what we're trying to do as well with Swash and data unions as a whole is the idea that when people are actually practicing their data dignity, there's another term from Jaron, that when people are actually realizing that in their real life, they're practicing their rights, that should kind of it should sort of raise standards across many different areas.
And I mean, since we're talking about data dignity and we've gone through all these stages, I guess I could ask you what's the next stage for Swash, because I can imagine that there will be a future beyond the browser.
Yeah, I mean, so we've got a roadmap, and one of the main things, there are sort of different elements we want to bring into it, but one of the main things, like you mentioned, beyond the browser would be to expand to mobile. I think that's a pretty obvious next step for us, because browser data is sort of one category of its own. There's like at least 200 different categories, if not more, all with their own umbrella categories too. And then, of course, more of us are using mobile, and the way that data is. I mean, I don't know. I think whether it's maybe some people tend to work more on a desktop and use social media more on their phone, or something like this. There's just a lot more that can be tapped into. And then in terms of other kind of news, like Next Stage, we're sort of expanding with different partners as well, being active in different data marketplaces, which has been so far really promising and really insightful, because you can we've already been talking to data buyers too, and a lot of them are really keen to be involved with what Swash is doing. Partly because third-party cookies are set to be regulated out, which will have a huge impact on those data buyers and what access they have, what access they'll have after that point. But then also just this general kind of reputation of wanting to really do good. And I think more and more people, even on the data buyer side, are sort of coming around to this idea and reaching out, which is really promising.
I mean, if you can make money in a healthier way for everyone, I think that's, why wouldn't you?
Exactly. Yeah. And I guess with that, like, people would be sort of skeptical maybe, or they'll go, oh, it's free money for kind of, but it's not free money because it's still part of an ecosystem that already exists.
And speaking of that ecosystem, I mean, you get paid in this. It's not a stable coin, right? Called data,
Mm-hmm.
and it will fluctuate or go up in value as it becomes more valuable. As the data becomes more valuable,
Mm-hmm.
the actual vouchers, if you want to use an equivalent that makes more sense in the real world,
Mm-hmm.
your monopoly money will actually become more and more valuable.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So there is this incentive as well. The more people that join the same union, the more relevant the data becomes. The more use cases that the data buyers have for that specific data,
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately the data coin that you get paid in becomes more valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And since that's connected to the Streamr network, each and every data union that's built on top of the Streamr network will make this coin be worth even more money.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess this applies to other types of data unions too, once they're built, is that you, like you said, you get the value from the value of that token itself, which is like its own currency. It works in its own ecosystem. But then also we all have heard now 1 Bitcoin 10 years ago. If we all had one, would be quite nice now, because I think it went past $12,000 or something recently.
Have a friend lost 100.
Oh no! Oh, that's painful. But there's always that famous pizza story too, of the guy that spent, I think, 2 Bitcoin or something on a slice of pizza in New York. Or something like this. But then the other side being that any data union model, because data is really unique as an asset of its own, that the more of it you have, the more valuable it becomes. It's not like you need scarcity to drive that value. So you kind of have the pool of people as a union becoming more valuable and then earning a higher value back. And like you said, the cryptocurrency itself.
I mean, I think the simplest way to put this is the more people that use a data union that's built on top of the Streamr network, Swash being the one to use right now. So keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
The higher the value of the tokens that you earn. Well, let's not call them tokens, because then we'll confuse them with something else. But the higher the value of the coins that you earn, if you want to change them back into fiat money, into normal regular money.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, with Swash too, like the simple thing is you sort of get paid for doing something you already do. So it's not like you're changing anything or needing to, I don't know, trade crypto or something to be a part and to actually benefit from the benefits of cryptocurrency as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming over. Virtually, Chloe. If let's say, I mean, I don't know if you plugged this one yet, but where can we get this this plugin?
Yeah, so you literally go onto our website, which is swashapp.io, and there's a button saying Get Swash. And when you click that, depending on what browser you're using, if you're on Chrome, for example, it will automatically take you to the Chrome store or your browser store. And then you literally just go through and install. And that's it. Once you're running, I know that sometimes like the little pop-up doesn't always automatically come up with browsers, so just double check that it's switched on. And then it's working, and that's it. And then
sorry,
go ahead. Oh no, I'm going to add that we have a referral program now as well. So you can always just copy your link, and that directly takes the person you send it to. It takes them to the store page as well for them to be able to install Swash.
And then you get 1 data as a reward for that. Data. Oh, who knows? Maybe it's like the 1 Bitcoin. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't hurt anyway.
No, obviously not. And also good to know for those of you who use Brave, which already gives you some, different coin, BAT. Because I presume that segment is probably interested in making money off their browsing. So it's good to know that if you're using Brave, Swash is compatible with Brave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. You can earn both simultaneously. That's already up and running.
This is great. I mean, at one point, you'll just have all these data unions running in the background and just walk around making money.
Yes, and passive income. And I mean, we don't even need the universal basic income argument, I guess, at that point. But yeah, I mean, we're also on Twitter, Telegram, Reddit as well, LinkedIn. So I'm always happy to answer questions or people to get in touch. And we're also really community driven. I think that's another thing in blockchain that's a real benefit too. So a lot of the feedback we get, we're implementing it and making sure that people, their voices are heard within the community. I'd say if you want to be in the discussion though, Telegram is definitely one of the best places.
Well, thank you very much for being here, Chloe. Swash app, get it, use it. Let's start this revolution. This was Digital Ragnarok. See you in the next one.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.